Thank you, Acting Speaker. I rise to lead the debate on the Children, Youth and Families Amendment Stability Bill 2025. It is my first time leading the debate on a bill in this parliament. I want to begin by saying that it is a genuine privilege to be able to do so. To be able to be given the responsibility to lead this debate on legislation goes to the very heart of the work that we do for children and young people and families, and it's something I don't take lightly. And I note that I will have to pause for the lunch break and return to this, so I'll just make some opening remarks before lunch. This specific bill, which seeks to make some significant changes, has been something that I have really been considering and looked into deeply, and I think particularly as a new mother, having had my first baby in January of this year, as the new Shadow Minister for Children and also Shadow Minister for Youth and Future Leaders, this is something very significant to me. It's not lost on me how important the work that we do in this place is and how important it is, particularly where it pertains to our most vulnerable, the children that we care for. So this is an important opportunity to examine how our systems support Victoria's most vulnerable children who are in the care of the state, how we provide them with genuine stability and security, and how this parliament can do better when it comes to keeping children safe. This is arguably the most significant change to the child protection and out-of-home care sector since the reforms were introduced by Minister Wooldridge when we were in government in 2014. Given the seriousness of this work and what it seeks to achieve for Victoria's most vulnerable children, I do have amendments I'll be moving in the House properly after the lunch break at this stage. And can I also just make a note and a thanks to the Minister for Children in the other place, Minister Blanthorne, whose office has actually been quite exceptional in arranging the briefings for us. Liam in her office, if I can say a thank you to him, has been very courteous and very helpful, and always appreciate that even though there might be robust debate in this chamber and in this house and words that fly back and forth, that we can be respectful of one another outside and still be able to have good working relationships outside of the robust debate and theatrics that sometimes happens in this House. Now, the specific bill and what it seeks to achieve is to amend the Children, Youth and Families Act 2005 to revise the legal framework governing children who are subject to protection orders with the stated aim of maximising safe, timely and sustainable opportunities for family reunification. The government has described this bill as a major reform, and it is. It represents the most significant change to Victoria's child protection system in more than a decade, and it fundamentally reshapes how the system will make decisions about stability and long-term outcomes for vulnerable children. The bill primarily amends the Act in three major ways. Firstly, by replacing the concept of permanency with the concept of stability, which actually is a reversal of what reforms were passed in 2014. That change is more than semantic. It introduces a new holistic definition of stability that includes legal, physical, cultural and relational components. It shifts the foundation on which all case planning, court decision-making and departmental interventions will be based. As I said, it is quite landmark. Oh, thank you, Liam. I didn't know you were here to say thank you too. The bill substantially changes the duration extension framework for family reunification orders. The bill allows the court to issue an initial family reunification order for up to 24 months, doubling the previous maximum of 12 months. It also permits the court to extend a family reunification order by additional periods of 12 months, and I will note that is with no limit, as defined by this bill, on the number of extensions. So what used to be that cumulatively children could only be in the system for 24 months under a family reunification order is now being doubled to the 24 months it was, initially, the family reunification order could be made for 12 months. It's now being doubled to 24 months from the outset. And now the cumulative 24 months is being removed from that, so there is the ability to then apply for the additional periods of extensions by 12 months with no limit on the number of extensions, provided the court considers this to be in the child's best interests. To enable this, the bill repeals the cumulative 12-month cap, as I said. Returning to my pleasure to resume the debate on the Children, Youth and Families Amendment Bill 2025 and return to what I was last speaking about as to my concerns about the bill that we are debating. That is the case that I will be moving amendments in the House and firstly moving a reasoned amendment. And Speaker, the reason being that stakeholders have raised with us the issue of not being consulted with. In fact, the bill was introduced without knowledge to key stakeholders in the out-of-home care sector, and for some, it took them by surprise. Broad stakeholders with lived experience as foster carers, kinship carers and permanent carers have not been consulted, and specifically these stakeholders have raised with me that the issue with this bill, and I quote, is that the voice of the child is missing from the bill despite these changes critically impacting their future. There is an issue that has been raised with me in this space by carers of all varieties who have raised with me their deep concern that children in care are not afforded agency over their futures, the agency that they deserve as children, and that the lack of consultation on this bill with children with lived experience in the out-of-home care system who have been under the family reunification orders highlights this further. Carers have written to me distressed at their inability to have a voice despite the fact that they are the ones that are caring for these children. One foster carer wrote to me and said, as carers, we are effectively silenced. The mandatory code of conduct with our agency prohibits us from speaking publicly, preventing us from being able to advocate for vulnerable children or exposing systemic failures. And that is why, in this case, where the stakeholders have raised with me that the voice of the child is missing from the bill, the very children that this bill impacts, the very children that these reforms will affect, there is not the voice of those with lived experience informing or having consulted on this bill. Therefore, and we know that the government often purports to support those with lived experience. So then I ask why it would be that many of the stakeholders who are the carers and the stakeholders that are leading the charge in this space have written to me saying they didn't know these changes were ahead. They didn't know that this was coming, and no, they were not consulted. Stakeholders have expressed their concern about many elements of this bill, and I read this recommendation from a specific group, Permanent Care and Adoptive Families, otherwise known as PCA families, who have recommended that we should pause this bill and pause changes to the Act until thorough consultation with people with lived experience and key stakeholders has taken place and clear evidence shows the changes are in the best interests of children. This is a key stakeholder that represents 3,700 kinship carers, foster carers, permanent carers in Victoria that have recommended, because they have not been consulted, that there should be consultation that takes place with those of lived experience. These key stakeholders are asking for this. And as one stakeholder put to me, they said, Nicole, for these children, it is just so important that we get this right. There's one of the members of the PCA families also wrote saying, as a permanent care family, I'm hoping PCA families will oppose these changes. How is longer time for reunification a good thing for stability for the child? Another carer wrote, or another family member, PCA families member wrote, I strongly believe more robust safeguards are required in the Act to ensure that a child's best interest, including their need for stability, is genuinely prioritised. And so if the government does as they purport to do and cares about lived experience, and they would support these amendments, would support this reasoned amendment that I put to the House this afternoon to include lived experience in this bill. And that being the case, that children only have one chance at a childhood. They only have one chance at it. It is so important that we get this right. It is so important that we consult with those of lived experience, and therefore we believe that the House should not proceed to debate this bill any further until the government has undertaken that broad and genuine consultation with all stakeholders, including those with lived experience as children in the system, and those who care for them. These are the voices that were not adequately included in the government's consultation, and these are the voices that carry the real life consequences to the decisions that we make here in this place. Accordingly, I move that all the words after that be omitted and replaced with the words, "This House refuses to read this bill a second time until the government has consulted more widely with all affected stakeholders, including stakeholders who have lived experience as children in care." Additionally, understanding orders, I wish to advise the House of amendments to the bill and request that they be circulated. The reasoned amendment specifically seeks to ensure that reforms of this scale are informed by the people who understand the system best and the children and the carers who rely on it. Now, to the concerns at hand beyond that and that which is contained in the reasoned amendment, Acting Speaker, another concern of ours on this side of the House is that this bill is a parent-focused and parent-centred approach rather than a child-centred approach. And one of the most consistent concerns raised is that this bill takes that approach to decision-making, and the focus of child protection must always be the safety, well-being and long-term outcomes of the child. Yet the structure of this bill, and particularly the open-ended nature of family reunification order extensions, it being that they are unlimited, places far greater emphasis on accommodating the needs and circumstances of adults rather than the rights of children and the rights of the child. Stakeholders have repeatedly warned that when systems prioritise adults over children, children become the ones that are left in limbo. That is why these reforms took place in 2014. This is why there was that reform initially that is now being reversed, and that is the risk of what is being embedded in this legislation. And to quote a carer's story, a kinship carer's story that wrote to our office, they wrote to us, and I quote, "Of their lived experience, after 3 years of exhausting court appearances, significant financial strain and deep family trauma, a permanent care order was finally granted for our grandchildren, giving us full parental responsibility. The journey to this point was harrowing. The words reunification still triggers painful memories of repeated attempts to return the children to birth parents despite overwhelming evidence of harm. Each attempt failed, causing further distress to the children and wasting time and resources while we watched in disbelief as the system prioritised reunification over safety. During these years, our grandchildren endured supervised contacts that were anything but safe. They returned from visits traumatised, having witnessed drug use, violence, threats, including promises to kidnap and harm family members. Both children were born addicted and now live with lifelong disabilities caused by prenatal exposure. Yet these contacts were deemed in the best interest of the child." And I quote, "Reading this bill, which repeatedly uses that phrase, alarms us. Our lived experience shows that without clear safeguards and timeframes, children remain in limbo, exposed to further trauma. No child should suffer what ours did." This is the words of a kinship carer and her own words of her lived experience. And this raises the concern of the calls for enduring reunification orders when there are experiences like this, and they are in the hundreds out there from all of the different groups and bodies that have spoken to us. In departmental briefings, it was acknowledged that some advocates even pushed for enduring reunification orders that would not require periodic review or extension, and that proposal was not adopted in this bill, which I do note, but its presence in consultation highlights the ideological framing of these changes. For some groups, reunification is viewed as the right of the parent, which is not a child-centred approach and is a matter of concern, as was raised in this lived experience of this specific family. Additionally to that, there is also the concern of the long-term harm backed by evidence, where research clearly shows that adverse childhood experiences are among, if not the number one, strongest predictor of negative life outcomes, including mental ill health and suicidality. Lifeline's work and data around adverse childhood experiences is very, very clear, And that is why there must be a child-centred approach, and why that is so important. A child-centred approach prioritises the reduction of uncertainty rather than prolonging it. With case studies, as we have seen, as I have just read out, the evidence is clear that that the sooner a child experiences long-term stability, the better their health, well-being and life outcomes. These adverse childhood experiences are what we must protect children from, are the protective factors that is incumbent upon us as legislators to be able to protect children from. These are the adverse childhood experiences that lead to these negative life outcomes, negative health outcomes that we are seeking to protect children from, where studies have shown that children who have been in permanent, safe and loving homes have been shown to have better short and long-term outcomes for their mental and physical health. Each placement move that a child experiences reduces the likelihood, this is what research shows, of being in the typical range for physical, cognitive and socioeconomic development. Additionally, another concern that we have on this side of the House is that a system in crisis cannot deliver stability. Speaker, these changes are proposed at a time when the child protection system is in crisis. This has been reported on widely, where there are chronic staff shortages, unsafe workloads, high turnover in staff, and unacceptable wait times for services across the state. In rural and regional areas in particular, families wait months, even years, for the very programs that are critical to reunification, including mental health support, alcohol and drug treatment, family violence interventions and parenting programs. Stakeholders consistently report that these delays create structural barriers for family that no legislation can fix. Extending the timeframes for reunification does not solve the problem. It is a band-aid on a bullet wound. It simply papers over the cracks of a system failure without the resources and capacity to support families in a timely way. Acting Speaker, these legislative changes will struggle to deliver real outcomes. And what is happening with this bill is that it will excuse the service gaps by changing the law. Instead of fixing the system that is in crisis, the government has used system failure to justify legislative change. Parents often fail to meet reunification requirements because they cannot access services, as simple as that. That is a failure on the government, not on these families. That is a failure on the government to protect these children, to create these structures, to have these services ready to go, to support these families in a wraparound service, wraparound way, to have a holistic solution rather than patching over the gap of this. Changing the law to accommodate inadequate services does nothing to fix the root cause of the problem. It leaves service gaps in place and leaves children bearing the consequences. Additionally, as I have noted earlier, the undoing of these the reforms that were brought by a Liberal government, it directly reverses the 2014 permanency amendments that were introduced by the Coalition to reduce drift in the system and ensure timely, safe and permanent outcomes of children. Those reforms set clear statutory timeframes because the court was granting extension after extension at the expense of the children's stability. The reforms are child-centred and focused on long-term well-being. This bill removes those safeguards and reopens the door to the very uncertainty to those reforms were designed to fix. Unlimited extensions of family reunification orders risk keeping children in prolonged states of uncertainty. Children need stable and predictable environments to heal from trauma, to heal from the vulnerable backgrounds they may have come from. And our concern is that these extensions will do the opposite. They will extend uncertainty, delay decision-making and expose vulnerable children to long-term harm. Another concern on this side of the House is the removal of adoption as an option. The complete removal of adoption as a pathway is concerning. While the history of forced adoptions and stolen generations must never be repeated, modern adoption practices are entirely different. They are open, transparent and grounded in consent. Adoption can, in some cases, provide children with the lifelong stability and belonging they deserve. Removing adoption entirely reduces the range of pathways available to vulnerable children and conflates past wrongs with contemporary practice in a way that is inaccurate and counterproductive. Unfortunately, the government has repeatedly conflated historical forced adoptions with today's consent-based open adoptions or simple adoptions, but they are very different systems. Adoption by known carers is the form of adoption that is active now. It has the full knowledge of the child and young person of the situation and maintains connection with the family. In Victoria, in fact, an integrated birth certificate is available which recognises both the birth parents and adoptive parents in relation to legal relationships. It is not a replacement birth certificate that doesn't sever the child from their biological parents, their cultural background, their community. In fact, further to that, in Victoria, the option is available to dissolve the adoption should this choice be one that they want to make at a later date. There is nothing hidden about this form of adoption and instead is about belonging in two families with the benefit of stability in the current carer home with the added layer of legal permanency. And evidence shows that the outcomes for wellbeing for children adopted from out-of-home care are favourable compared to those who remain in out-of-home care. And I also have, Acting Speaker, a short testimonial from an adoptive family which highlights the clear distinction between the open consenting adoptions and how positive they can be. And the adoptive family wrote to me and says, and I quote, "My husband and I have adopted two children through local adoption in Victoria, now aged 8 and 5. We pursued adoption in the hopes to provide a family for children who needed one. Several years ago, we received a call about a six-month-old boy who needed a family. Shortly after birth, he had received a diagnosis of a rare genetic syndrome. We were given time to consider if we felt able to parent him, and we agreed that we wanted to move forward while knowing the journey may not be easy. Before meeting him, we had the opportunity to meet his birth parents. After meeting us, they felt that we were the right fit to parent their son, and they gave us consent for the adoption to proceed. Holding our son for the first time was one of the most memorable experiences of our life, and it was with great joy that we welcomed him into our family. Over the past 7 years, his joyful and loving personality has been a gift to us. We have seen him grow and develop in amazing ways despite the limits of his diagnosis. Our lives and the lives of our community have been enriched because of him. We see his birth parents and siblings every school holidays, and our son enjoys the connection he has with them. His birth parents bring a gift for him at every catch-up. We send through photos and regular updates, and we have mutual respect between our families. We'll continue to support his connection to his birth family throughout his life as we recognise the significance of these relationships. Our second son joined us after being born into difficult circumstances, enduring through a traumatic start to life. While helping a child navigate loss and trauma takes intentional effort and understanding, it is a privilege to help our son feel loved, safe and secure. We are committed to a lifelong journey towards his healing from a traumatic past. His birth parents have chosen not to take up the opportunity for contact with him. However, if at some point in the future they wanted to, we would support this connection. Part of our commitment is to write yearly updates with photos to store on file with Adoption Victoria to be available for the birth parents if they were to seek out further information. We believe our sons will continue to thrive through our lifelong commitment to them, along with helping them to understand their history, culture of origin and supporting connection with their birth families. It is our joy to provide our boys with a loving family and believe they both have a bright future ahead of them. Now, I know this family personally. This is a family where the mother of the family has chosen to give up her full-time work to be a full-time carer, to do everything she can to look after these vulnerable children that she has since adopted. And these are the stories, and this is the prioritisation of even the connection to the biological parents that they maintain, that they are so connected to, that they make sure that there is that community connection, that cultural connection, that I know the lengths that this family has gone to, but this is the story, and these are the stories that children are missing out on by removing adoption from this legislation. The government has cited 4 reports as the foundation for this bill, and yet the recommendations that have been cherry-picked ignore key findings, and that is a concern to us. The selective use of evidence shows that whilst the government relied heavily on the Safe and Wanted report, even though it was conducted only 6 months after the 2014 reforms commenced, the report itself cautions that its conclusions are limited due to the short time frame and explicitly calls for a longitudinal study. The longitudinal study then took place, the permanency longitudinal study specifically, which later found that the 2014 reforms improved timeliness and delivered more stable outcomes from children. Yet this hasn't been included in this bill. Policy based on selective evidence is not good policy, and certainly not good policy for these children whose lives depend on stability, Acting Speaker. And again, I raise the fact that there has been no evidence of consultation with foster carers, permanent carers, adoptive families, kinship networks, frontline child protection workers, or residential care providers. These are the very people who are tasked with providing day-to-day care for our most vulnerable children, and good reform requires broad consultation. Reform of this magnitude demands it. That is why we have moved this reason amendment in the House, and why we have also moved the reason amendment as to the time frame for review. This bill has not arisen in a system that is functioning well. It has not arisen in a context where children are consistently safe, where early intervention is strong, or where the support systems surrounding families are operating as they should. It has arisen because the systems that should protect children are overwhelmed, because families cannot access the support they need, and because early years services, mental health services, housing services and family violence responses are all stretched beyond their limits. It is so important that we get this right. It is so important that we consult broadly. It is so important that we have the time frame for review reduced so that we can look after those that are most vulnerable in our care.